circle of life. So you start with scoping, you mobilize, you anticipate, you recommend, you transform, then you evaluate, and then you start renewing the whole process again, right? So it goes from exploring what possibilities are there, then you shape the future and you learn. So it's a circle. And that's how you can move from smart to smarter. And it applies to everything in life. So if you take a moment to evaluate where you are and where you're coming from, then you can renew yourself as well as an individual and you can think what you want to do next in your life, personal and professional. So that was the basics of the first lecture. Okay? Then the second lecture, we were discussing 15 foresight techniques. Okay? We are not going to discuss them all here, but just to highlight that, to remind you that 5 of them were qualitative. So we discussed backcasting, brainstorming, citizens panels, expert panels, and scenarios, the ones highlighted in bold. And I explained to you the difference between qualitative methods, quantitative, and semi-quantitative. So qualitative, they're basically very subjective and creativity-based techniques like brainstorming, conducting interviews, organizing citizens panels, and expert panels. And then quantitative, they require data, right? So you can quantify, you look at the number of papers, number of publications, citations, indicators, time series analysis, modeling, patents, analysis, extrapolation of different type of values and indicators that you have. And then the semi-quantitative methods like Delphi, like polling and voting, road mapping, they help you uh, codify subjectivity and quantify it. And they're based on opinions of experts or people and stakeholders, and you can translate their views on whether something is very positive, you give a +3, or very negative, you give a -3, or something which is neutral, you give 0, right? So, but you codify. So these values, they are based on people's opinions. So we were discussing this. And the recommendations or the final remarks from that lecture was that the semi-quantitative category is important because there are many people who believe that the methods are quantitative, but it is important to remember that these figures are based on opinions, that many of these methods are powerful because they help to provide representation, and there are different ways in which quantitative and qualitative techniques are being enhanced by computing uh, impact on representation, and the use of ChatGPT can also help to process a lot of this material, qualitative. Quantitative methods and semi-quantitative sometimes, but mainly quantitative, are useful because they can be replicable, right? So you can do statistical analysis if you have the indicators for one country, and then if the results are very powerful and useful, then you replicate it and you use it in another country if you have the figures, right? And then there is an important dominance of qualitative methods and values because the future is yet to be built and imagined, right? So hopefully the future you will live in will be imagined by humans, not AI. And that's based on your heads and those heads of decision makers that are creatively thinking about the future. So qualitative methods, they have a predominance in foresight, but they are mixed and there are synergies with other methods. So methods, they projects, they combine, and there are synergistic effects between these methods. So that was in that lecture that you can revise because everything is in the Teams folder. So hopefully you are looking into this. So the exam will be based on the lecture, but here I'm giving you some highlights. And then the next lecture was focused on foresight methods and how they are selected. Okay. And I showed you that they are in average in a large data set of more than 800 methods that I was analyzing back in the 2008 and 2009. I was looking at more than 800 methods, projects, and in average They have uh, 5 to 6 methods, these projects, and they do link to these 4 dimensions of the foresight diamond, which I also presented in another lecture. So normally these methods, in addition to combining qualitative, semi-quantitative, and quantitative, they also bring in this evidence, expertise, interaction, and creativity. So they are nicely distributed. And in that lecture, I introduced the methods mix, or the methods combination matrix, that shows in darker color how methods combine with each other, the compatibility, or how methods, 25 methods times 25. So these are the same methods. And then when you find VH, is very highly combined. So this shows that, for example, road mapping, okay, which is here as method number 15, is very highly combined with literature review, with expert panels, and then moderately combined with the scenarios, with trend extrapolation, and it is uh, highly combined. So this is M for moderate, and highly combined with futures workshops and with key technologies analysis. And you can do this if you are building a methodology. This matrix can help you. Uh, doesn't replace our decision making, but it helps you to build this mix. And this is the example I just basically was referring to. If you have to build a methodology around road mapping, then you know that these are other methods that are very highly combined, and moderately combined. So there is a portfolio of 6 methods that are ranging from creativity-based, interaction-based, evidence-based, and expertise-based. And overall, the conclusions of this lecture was that there are, out of all these factors that we were discussing, 2 factors, they have a very high influence in the selection of methods, which are here in the table, as with these dots, with 4 dots. So this is the intrinsic nature, whether the methods are quantitative, qualitative, and so on, very high influence. And the methods mix, which I just showed you a second ago. So these 2 factors, they have very strong influence in the selection. There are 3 factors with high influence, which is the diamond itself. So whether it is creativity, expertise, interaction, and evidence, so high. And the geo-R&D context, which I explained to you, not today, but in the lecture, that is not the same to do a project in a country like, for example, Finland, which is in a Nordic European country, highly developed, aiming to get 4% of GDP investment in R&D, than to do foresight in a country with very low R&D intensity, for example, Bulgaria or Romania. Okay, and Turkey is not very close to Finland either, right? So there are different type of considerations methodologically that will have a high impact, or the codified output if you are aiming for roadmaps for trends analysis and so on. And other factors in this presentation have moderate or low impact. Then continuing with the methods and methodologies, in November, we also had a lecture where I was showing you the basic principles as well of foresight, which were the triple P: prospective, participation, and policy making. But if you want to make robust, more fully fledged foresight, then evidence-based coordination and transdisciplinarity are important principles. And the classic 3 uses of foresight is used to inform decision making, to assist policy implementation, and to create new capabilities. And these capabilities are for organizations and for different type of institutions, to foster strategic thinking, anticipatory intelligence, and so on. So to create a new aptitude and attitude towards the future. Ultimately, in that lecture, I mentioned that there are many methods that were discussed, more than 33 in some of the lectures, and these are methods that you think you might know, because I have presented them in that lecture. Some methods I simply mentioned, but I didn't go into details. So you think you don't know because perhaps it was only during that lecture that I mentioned the method, but you did not further research, but you heard about it. And there are methods that you don't even know that you don't know. So it's a black box there because I didn't mention so far. So the methodological toolbox and toolkit is open, but I think the 33 plus methods that I have mentioned in this course are more than sufficient to recognize the complexity and the importance of building robust methodological frameworks. But the methodology is not just a selection of methods, but the combination, and the methodology is only one piece of this jigsaw of the smart foresight process. It's one piece of the scoping element, which is dynamic and adapts to the uh, mobilization phase, to the anticipation phase, to the recommending, and so on. So in that lecture, I also highlighted the importance to think in a more systemic way about the smart futures jigsaw, which is a framework I developed in 2011 back then, right? Then after that, we went a bit deeper into some of the methods. So we had a lecture on cross-impact and critical issues analysis. We are not going again into all the details here, but just to remind you, revisit this lecture. It's in French, it's called La Prospectus, and there are different approaches linked to this. The structure analysis, MICMAC and MACTOR, which is a matrix-based methodology where you plot into a matrix different variables and you ask what is the influence of one variable over all the other variables in the system. And if you go by the row, if you go by the column, then basically is the question is what is the dependency that the variable a y has over all the other variables. The diagonal is empty because you don't ask how you influence yourself or how the same variable influence itself. And based on these matrix operations, you look into direct influence or direct impact. How can I directly, for example, influence you by transferring knowledge to you? But if you have a boyfriend or a girlfriend, or you have a sibling, you have a brother or a sister, and then you go back home and you say, hey, today I had a lecture and I understood this type of direct influence is very interesting, and you can do it this way and that way, and you tell that story to your friend or to your sister or to your girlfriend or boyfriend, then indirectly I, actor A, might be having an indirect influence over C and over D if that person tells the story to someone else, right? So that's the basic logic of cross impact, that you might have a direct influence. One variable might have, one country might have an impact on B, but that country B can have an influence on C and D, and therefore indirectly A can have influence on C and D. And based on this, you can, this method allows you through matrix multiplication and influence to determine how, for example, a country like the EU with zero influence over the US and zero influence over Russia in that hypothetical study or just a demo, when you multiply this by itself, then you find ones and ones here. And basically, how is this one emerging from here? It's a very basic matrix operation. So here the formula is, but through the UK, if the EU influences UK policy and the UK influences US and influences Russia, so indirectly through the UK, the EU could influence US and Russia. And this applies in real life to technologies as well, to economic decisions and so on. So this method is quite powerful to recognize direct and indirect influences. Another method that we went deeper was the critical issues analysis, where we have a modified version of SWOT. instead of strengths and weaknesses, we have drivers and barriers. We have the opportunities and threats to look at the future, but to look in the present, we look at major drivers and barriers. And if you did the tutorial, you probably had learned a lot about technological, economic, environmental, political, societal, and ethical. And more recently, we're adding spatial. So from STIPSy, we go to STIPSys. Drivers, barriers, opportunities, and threats that influence sustainable innovation is what we had in that tutorial that some of you have completed. And these issues, they come from multiple sources. They come from creativity-based methods like scenarios and brainstorming. They come from interactive-based methods like workshops, citizens panels, from modeling, from literature review, and from expert panels. Okay? And what we normally do, we plot them into a large canvas and we ask experts and stakeholders to assess their importance, their urgency, their uncertainty, and then we use Likert scale from 1 to 5, 1 to 7, and then we identify what we consider critical. And based on this, we develop roadmaps. So basically, when we have hundreds of those critical issues, we are moving from unstructured complexity, and we have them all mapped through stakeholders analysis. Then we rank them, we prioritize them, we assess their impact and likelihood, we assess how critical they are, we identify causal maps of this uncertainty. So we're moving from unstructured complexity to structured simplicity, and then to structural complexity when we add the policy dimension and we identify multiple scenarios and policy options and which one is the most robust because there are positive impacts associated to them. And these are some examples of how this has been used in the UK through different methods from 300 plus emerging issues. We use scanning, and we were looking at aging society, and then we use critical issues to generate what are the most important emerging issues. And we prioritize some 11 of those, and we created recommendations and implications, right? So this is an example of how we apply this approach to aging-related emerging issues for the workforce. Then we had another lecture on wildcards and weak signals analysis, if you, hopefully you remember. So we were looking at the frameworks and why these are important and how do they link to complexity and basic concepts of future scenarios on what are wildcards and what are weak signals as events with low probability and high impact if they occur, wildcards and weak signals as seeds of change. And then how does this link to the foresight process? And here, the important thing is that wildcards and weak signals analysis is only one piece of the jigsaw as well. But this piece is very important because it can really transform many of these future decisions. And then as well, when we look at it from the perspective of the foresight diamond, wildcards, they sit on top of this diamond because they are the methods that require the most creativity, creative thinking, because you need to really think out of the box of what disruptions we are going to have. And in that presentation, we introduced the idea of this ready, steady, go, like simple way of remembering how to conduct this. Uh, One is to do inward looking and top down. So we identify the number of people and what topics they're looking into. Then the outward looking with the same team. You ask them to look outside Europe or outside your country, outside the area, and then bottom up, bringing different stakeholders to generate these ideas inward and outward. So these strategies we have used successfully in Europe. We were looking at the framework programs. These balls represent research funding programs in Europe. So we were looking inward, top down, and bottom up. And then we were looking outward, what is happening in science fiction blogs, in literature, in Nobel Prize winners, in the academic literature outside Europe, and so on. And So these are the approaches we introduced in IMO and READY. Then we developed different types of methodologies to recognize and to analyze weak signals based on the three types of uncertainty: uncertainty of interpretation, uncertainty of importance, and uncertainty of impact. So when a weak signal has all three uncertainties, then this is really important weak signal, right? But only one of these is sufficient, like Donald Trump, right? So people do not know whether he's going to bring a lot of opportunities or a lot of threats, right? So half, a little bit more than half of the American society saw him as an opportunity, whether you like him or not. He was elected, right? Well, the other half almost saw him as a threat, right? So there is a huge uncertainty about whether this Trump movement and the Trump 2.0 government is interpreted as positive or negative, right? So therefore, you need to analyze carefully because it might lead to wildcards and people. There is a lot of that you can see in the news about the unpredictability of Donald Trump and his policies and everything, because many things can change dramatically. So it's an interesting weak signal. Even though weak signal doesn't mean that it's weak. What is weak is our understanding is weak because of the level of uncertainty is very high and very strong. So we are very weak in understanding what are the implications of these signals. So they are very important to decide and to identify wildcards. And wildcards are very important because they are very disruptive. They can be natural events that catch us by surprise, like the Los Angeles fires. They are natural. Although some people have been caught, so it might also be in some areas by arsonists. We will learn in months to come how many of those fires were genuinely natural. Some of them might be unintentional surprises or accidental, and some of them might be intentional, right? But the idea is that there are three main types of wildcards, and there are some weak signals associated to these natural events, many weak signals related to unintentional surprises and accidents, and a few related to it. So we develop frameworks, and we discuss this in a lecture on how these are important. And so that was the ready and then go, ready, steady, go, is how to use this to inform decision making. And you have seen this before. So we have used and we developed this framework in the IMO project. So this is why it appears here again, to assess these different type of weak signals to identify what can be coming next, more of the same, what is the end of some issues, the re-emergence and the emergence of new issues, to assess and to provide recommendations for action, recommendations for what to do to deal with the implications and the impacts, whether they will be negligible or high impacts for infrastructure, for people's life, for legislation and regulation, economy. So this is a template that I also show you. And who should be looking at what? So who are the scanners, who are the shapers and the stakeholders associated? So these are templates that we have used to work with wildcards. And these are templates, again, that we have used in workshops to analyze the wildcard in the middle and then what to do before the wildcard happens and what can policymakers do, business and research, and what to do after it happens. So pre-wildcard and post-wildcard. And with these frameworks, we developed different reports, and some of these reports will be as well uploaded in, if you are interested in the folder. But this particular red report in 2011, and the very first policy issue, policy alert, was on COVID, on the killer virus, which we identify using that framework. Okay, so it's a powerful one. And after that, we had a lecture on road mapping, okay, and advice generation. So 6 types of recommendations, which are the face of recommending futures. So these are the pieces of the jigsaw. Advice on policies and actions, on initiatives and actors, appropriation and investments, alliances, and foresight and horizon scanning in brackets, because sometimes we recommend to do more foresight and more horizon scanning, but to do more research on different areas can be basic research in advance. And we also discussed the importance of mm, complexity of foresight-driven advice, right? So some recommendations can be less complex and less exploratory. So, and some of them, oh, there is an issue with the visualization here, but you get the point. There's something happened with when I transfer the slide. But in this less complex, less exploratory, you have one single future that lead to to some. Yeah, here you can see, but it's strange. The visualization. Okay, it's fixed automatically. Good. So you have, it's not the same to produce one scenario and one recommendation on how to arrive to the scenario than to produce multiple scenarios and select from this which one you want for yourself or your organization and how to achieve it, or one scenarios and multiple ways to achieve it, or multiple scenarios and multiple recommendations. So this multiple scenarios and multiple advice is more complicated and more exploratory. So requires more funding, more people. Okay, so if you are in the future involved in a project and they are asking you to develop multiple futures and multiple advice, you better check that you have time and you have money, you have resources. Otherwise, you can tell the organizer, hey, sorry, but I can only deliver one future and one advice. I don't have time for this. So many projects, they have this problem that the sponsor wants to have a lot, but do not have resources to deliver. And I have supervised a PhD study that was looking into this issue of how to develop robust advice. And this is the framework from my former colleague, Guillermo Velasco. That was his main finding in his PhD, that connected the three phases, the three P's of foresight: prospective, participation, and policy, these three layers, with the five phases: scoping, mobilizing, anticipating, recommending, and transforming. And the PhD focused mainly on how the anticipatory thinking can build robust and important recommendations. And this was done through the triple R: repositioning people into different type of futures. You inject into people's head, okay, we have very incremental and very radical futures. What would you do? Representation, you bring together different stakeholders, uh, policymakers, industry people, citizens, and they represent different uh, segments of society. And the resolution, you prepare the recommendation in ways that you use argumentation, logic, and different ways of narrative to make sure that stakeholders are acting upon. And you might remember that there are different type of actions, recommendations, new, ongoing, concluding, and combining different actions, and recommendations that can be sound, that can be uh, unsound at the bottom, and it depends on how they fulfill these four requirements. So if I give you the recommendation, if you are hungry, then you need to eat, right? So I say, okay, you should eat. But if I say, okay, you can eat this peanut, well, this is not sufficient. You will still be hungry with one peanut. But if I said, okay, you should have bigos or some gyros or something very Greek or very Turkish, sorry, big Turkish meal, and then I can recommend you to go to a very expensive restaurant, and you say, sorry, I don't have the money to do this. Or I can recommend you to go to Żabka and to buy something that you can put in the microwave, but you say, sorry, I don't like microwave because it will have collateral effect. It's not healthy, right? So, but if I give you a recommendation that you need and it's sufficient, it is feasible, and you also have no collateral effects, then my advice to you is sound, right? So you have an exam on Thursday, so you need to revise the slides, and the slides are in the Teams folder. If you revise the slides, including this summary, Will it be sufficient for you to pass the test? The answer is yes. Do you have the resources? Well, I ask you, you have internet? Yes. You have your sight? You have no problem with your eyes? Yes, you can do it. You have time? I think you have time. And I have done this revision today, which includes most of the questions of the test, right? Any collateral effects? No, I don't think so. So my advice to revise the slides is sound, and hopefully you will take it. And this is something that can be done at strategic level, that can be done at mid-level tactical actions and operational levels, right? So there are different ways in which and different levels in which this advice is given. And I also gave some examples of how we do this in workshops with those cases. No? So we put the advice or recommendation on the center, who should do this, when, the year, and which key aspects in the framework, in the dimensions that we have in the action roadmap. And these are the different key aspects. Uh, there are four dimensions: context, people, process, which are these ones: context, people, process, and impact of the action roadmap. We had a lecture on that, and the 10 key aspects associated to them, and how we have used these post-its and this methodology to identify what is the current best, what people are doing, best practice, what is the next best advice that you can give for the next 5 years or 10 years, and what's the future thinking applied, looking 20 years and so on. So the time horizon, and you can use different color post-its. So with this revision and with the presentation of today, we close the strategic foresight, okay? And and the innovation management doesn't, in my opinion, require uh, a revision of this kind. That was very short and sharp. But if you would like, because the exam is from 30 minutes to 45 minutes, and we have reserved some time on Thursday, I can give a very quick revision of half an hour of the innovation management, similar to this one, to refresh, and then to make it uh, easier for your brain and for the absorptive capacity that you might have. We can, after that revision, have immediately first the innovation management exam. We have a break, and we have the strategic foresight exam later. Is that okay? Or you don't need a revision for innovation management and we jump straight away to the two exams? What do you prefer?
Professor, it would be great if you make a revision.
Okay, so I will prepare a half an hour revision of what we did. Did you like this revision?
Yes, Professor.
Maybe that would be better.
Yes. You found it useful to remember everything that we covered this semester?
Yes, yes,
Yes,
Professor.
because it is very vast that we couldn't just memorize everything. It is very vast and interesting, starting from a lot of case studies are presented, and it is very interesting to have this through a revision, really.
Good. So I will prepare a similar revision for the highlights from the innovation and strategic management course. We start the first half an hour with that revision. Then we do the test. We have a break and we do the strategic foresight test on Thursday. Okay. Let's double check that we have it in our calendar, because sometimes, as you know, teams have played some tricks on me and on you too. So I have here that we start on Thursday at 9:15 your time. Is that correct?
Yes,
Yes. And do you have it already on your calendar or not?
I
Do you
have
have
it
the
on my calendar.
Do you have the Teams
Uh,
invitation? Do you have the link? Can
Actually,
you?
I have it in my calendar, but it sounds to be, or it looks to be, starting at 8 a.m., not 9.
Okay. Okay. So we
Yeah,
can
so
start
8.
at eight. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
It
But
it start it looks from 8 to 10.
yes, but
8 to 10.
I only have you for some reason. Islam, right?
No, I'm Yavuz. I'm
Ah,
Yavuz.
okay. All right. But you have all of you have it.
I guess so because I remember that we got notification when we create this meeting at 16 of
Okay.
January.
Yeah, it's very strange because I only look it show it only shows Islam for some reason. Doesn't show
Well,
any
I went to the calendar segment in our MS Teams platform.
and you have it.
Uh, in the calendar, I have it that it shows that on 16 of January, Thursday, there is meeting from 8 to 10, strategic foresight and innovation management tests,
Okay. And
created by Professor Raphael Pope.
good. What about the others? You all have it?
I have also, Professor.
Okay. So then technically we are all set. If you have no questions, then we can end today's session. Okay. And we meet each other on Thursday.
Okay,
It
Professor.
is on 8 or 9.
Yeah, it is 8 o'clock your time, and it's 9 o'clock because I'm in Finland now. So it is 8 o'clock Polish time. From we have reserved 2 hours from 8 to 10, right?
Okay. Okay.
Yes, it's 8 to 10 at Polish time. 8 to 10.
Good. So the first half an hour from 8 to 8:30, I will give you the the revision of innovation management, and then we jump straight away to the exam, which is maximum 45 minutes. But I would say that in half an hour we can complete. We can have a break, and then we have the other exam. Okay.
Okay, Professor.
Good. So have a nice rest of the evening, and see you on Thursday. Thank you for joining today.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank
Widzenia.
you
Goodbye.
for today,
Thank you,
Professor.
Professor.
Have a
Bye
nice
bye.
day.
You too. Bye bye.